And good evening, everybody, for another Sunday night with Talking TSR. I am your co-host, Chris, and to my virtual left, as always, is Rick. Rick, say hi to the wonderful people out there in streaming land.
It's nice to join everyone now that we're back from Gen Con a little more
Yes.
rested, back into the normal groove,
Yes, I know it's so weird. It seems like forever since we've done one of these shows, but
right?
it was just 3 weeks ago we did one of these live from Gen Con. So I hope everybody enjoyed that show. It was a lot of fun to actually do that show, a little bit different and all that. We're gonna mix it up a little bit. But we are on episode 52 of Talking TSR, which is crazy. And believe it or not,
Crazy.
we are coming down to the end of the season here. I mean, we don't have only have a few more shows to go. Where pumpkin spice season is like right
Yeah,
around the corner. So,
summer
oh,
went too fast,
yeah, it always does. It always
right?
does.
It does. It really
Yeah,
does, man.
I completely agree. Pretty light on the announcements so far. If you guys have not heard, we did announce that our next crowdfunding project will be OAR number 8, Grimtooth's Old School Traps. And I think Elena's going to drop the link in for that, the landing page for that. We are starting to announce these and we're starting to hype these up a lot earlier than we used to try and build excitement about them. So we're going to keep talking about them a little bit. So and this is what a perfect timing because the module that we're going to talk about here
Yeah,
uh this week has loads of traps in it, and
loads
actually
of
the whole
traps.
series has a bunch of them. So we are going to be talking about dungeon module I3 Pharaoh,
Yeah,
and published in 1982 by Tracy and Laura Hickman. Rick, why don't you give us your thumbnail opinions of this classic adventure?
sure. Quick thumbnail. I think this is definitely regarded as, the Egyptian module. Certainly there were other adventures that had Egyptian themes or similar kind of themes running through them, but this one really defines it. I think if you ask anybody to think of an Egyptian, classic Egyptian adventure, this even among this series, this particular module I3, I think is what springs to mind, at least certainly for me. The module was originally published in 1980 as part of the Night Ventures line by Tracy and Laura, and then they ran into unfortunately some financial trouble, and they decided at that time to sell it to TSR, and that kind of became the stepping stone for Tracy being hired as a game designer by TSR, who evidently liked his work. So their loss was our gain, I guess, because it brought more prominence to both this and Rahaksha. So I can't even say that. So basically, we got two good modules out of it, and then obviously many more to come. So it really kind of started something.
Yeah, like Dragonlance, just some
Yeah,
small other little things that
yeah.
are still kicking around these
Um,
days, doing a wonderful job.
yeah, so yeah, they originally published it in 1980, and then what was it, 1982, I think.
Yeah, 82 was
Right,
was
82, yeah, is when
yeah.
TSR published it. And I think you can kind of credit this module in a way of starting what people sometimes refer to as the Hickman Revolution, where basically
Yes.
the Hickmans were kind of known for really their adventures had this heavy, cohesive, deeper storyline behind them. Before that, we had very locale based adventures. The players, there might be an overarching plot over a series of modules or something, but nothing like what the Hickmans brought to the table, where they almost put the plot, I don't want to say they put the plot before the adventure, but they really put a strong emphasis on the plot and the players being a component of the plot. And
Yes.
it really kind of, I think, changed the way modules were written, and played for a lot of people. So I think that's kind of something that, people forget about this module. I think sometimes that we really need to give it credit for, because it really did change the way modules were written for a lot of authors, after that.
Yeah, totally agree. First of all, Dice Station Zebra, good evening back to you. Yes, folks, use the second link that Helena put in the thing there. The first one was not the complete thing, but that second one apparently is working. Commando Solo 193 says that's working much better. So thanks lots of guys. Check out the landing page, and that landing page is going to be evolving over the next couple of weeks, and we've got some exciting actual programming around it and everything. So make sure you keep tabs on what we're doing there. But yes, well said. So this is the classic Egyptian adventure. In 1982, what classic movie came out in 1982 that dealt with dusty
Mm,
tombs and not too way too
mm.
many snakes and
I didn't
everything?
even think about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, it's just like just think about the timing of that
Yeah,
was
good
probably
timing.
amazing. I don't know what month this adventure actually came out, but like if it came
Mhm.
out later in the year, well, that would have been perfect. I mean, because I'm pretty sure Indiana Jones was a summer release. It was probably a May or a June release.
Sounds about
But
right.
yeah, I mean, it was clearly front and foremost, and it probably equated to some of the nostalgia that this adventure brings and the fond
Mhm.
memories and everything. And you're so right about the plot and the backstory really kind of being at the forefront of it, really kind of being plot and backstory first, and then adventuring sites
Yeah.
second, almost. And sometimes that lends to maybe not all of the encounters are as impactful as
Hmm.
you'd like, because sometimes you just need to get from point A to point B to keep the story moving or
Yeah.
something, or sometimes, whatever that component of that first part or whatever just might not have as much oomph because you're getting to a larger story. But
Hmm.
and we also have to mention this was the first of three in the Desert of Desolation
Hmm.
series, which was later republished as officially I3 through 5 Desert of Desolation, and I think they converted it for the Forgotten Realms, if I recall, but they kind of tied it in a little bit
Yeah.
more to the Forgotten Realms, and they added, just like they did with the Slaver series and the GDQs, they added some additional, um, I guess I would say connective tissue, I guess, to kind of make it work a little bit better, especially bridging the adventures together.
Hmm.
But definitely classic. One of my favorite adventures of all time. I'm sure, if you recall, it was on the top
Hmm.
10 list that we did earlier this year.
Yep.
I just love so many things about this adventure. I mean, when we did our top five list, I easily could have done a top 10 list,
Hmm.
and probably even more. I mean, there's just so many things that inspired me moving forward in my writing career, this adventure and everything. I assume the same for you
Oh
as
yeah.
well.
No, I can't agree enough. I've even seen things I've done where I don't even think consciously I was tapping this module, but I
Yeah.
went on, I think we have a graphic, Elena, of the training ground map. Back for Dungeon Magazine, I wrote an adventure called Training Ground, something that was set in the Forgotten Realms, and it had a maze of traps in it. And if you look at the map I did for that, at the time I wrote it, I wasn't really thinking of Pharaoh, but I absolutely owned and loved Pharaoh. And looking at it now, I really feel like definitely there was some Pharaoh was channeling through that when I wrote that. So definitely
Yes.
an inspiration for me too. It's more of a sum of the parts. There are some really cool encounters in here, but it's more the whole. It's just like
Yes.
the maze level as a whole, and even just sort of some structural things like the way water is sort of mapped out and running through this whole map system is just so impressive to me, and that's definitely inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. Without a doubt. I agree. It's so funny that you mentioned that, how unintentionally inspired you. When I was doing my review of this, apparently there is a magic sword in the adventure called True Death.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recall that specifically, but when I wrote Crypt of the Devil Lich, I made Calikia's magic sword be called True Death. And it's like, again, one of those things where I was probably subconsciously
Mm-hmm.
inspired by it, but and obviously that, but I've also been consciously, if this has inspired some of my writings, FEF number 6, Lost, Raiders of the Lost Oasis.
Mm-hmm.
um so many inspirations from this adventure in there, obviously very Egyptian feel. It's set in a little dusty tomb and everything. And even DCC 15, Lost Tomb of the Sphinx Queen, when I stepped in and finished that project many years ago, I remember pulling this adventure out and kind of using it for some inspirations with the runes on the walls and
Mm-hmm.
some of the puzzles and everything, the format of the puzzles. So definitely, I mean, that's the sign of a classic
Yeah.
when you pull inspiration from it and you pull it out when you're working on an assignment for something else, and you're like, well, I want to review this because
Mhm.
I kind of remember that. So, and good evening to you, Grape Ape TX. I assume Texas. We'll go with Texas. Good evening to you. Once and everybody, it's great to be back. Where we can see the comments actually, as opposed to when we were
Yeah.
live at Gen Con. That was the one thing we missed. We need to have a second. Yes, Texas is correct. We need to have a second screen next time, and so that we can have the comments up, so that we can actually be looking at the comments. That'd be amazing if we could do that.
Wouldn't it?
So yeah. So what is the when I say I3 Pharaoh, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when
To my
because we
mind,
talk about this, well, we talk about this all the time, kind of that little touchstone
yeah.
bit and everything. What is conjured to your image of that?
The first thing that strikes me is that kind of map gatefold. I
Yes.
I love the breakout maps. I like the maps. Some things are not 100% clear that, like structurally wise, even with all the cross sections. But there's something about the design of the maps in here that is so elegant that that's what I think of immediately, even beyond the design of the module itself, which is so wonderful. But I think of that map gatefold and even that sort of one panel spider illustration from the sunken city
Yeah.
just jumps out, like it just pops into my head. And then beyond that, the maze level is the first thing because it's just so evil.
Yeah.
That, and again, and then like I said, kind of very inspiring. Yeah, I just love it. And like I said, it's got such a nice you said it's got such a strong Egyptian feel to it, and it doesn't impede it. I like to think, because Tamoachin is one of my favorites, that the Aztec, theme isn't too off-putting, that, because it's played so well into the module. But I think this is one too that maybe I think Egyptian is a little more approachable to folks because we're all a little more familiar with it perhaps than Mesoamerican mythos and things of that nature. But still, the Egyptian theme could be off-putting to some, but this module's so wonderfully done that it's a strength. It's not a weakness, this foreign locale. It just makes it extra special. And at the point this came out, we didn't really see desert adventures weren't exactly a commonality. So that's
No.
cool too. It's just such a interesting foreign place to plop the characters that to me it's irresistible.
Yeah, no, agreed 100%. I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is with this event is the Egyptian theming.
Hmm.
And a lot of times we talk about specific encounters that
Hmm.
we think about that when we think of an adventure.
Yeah.
This one, because there's so many encounters, and then there's so many in I4 and there's so many in I5, I actually get them confused of like which encounter is in which one.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, it's like I was convinced that the falling pit one was in this one where you had the teleportation where you're falling endlessly in a
Hmm.
pit. I could have swore that was in this adventure, but apparently it's not. So spoiler alert, that one's going to be one of my favorites coming soon. But I don't think that's a necessarily bad thing. I mean, I do think the maze was such, there's a whole level
Hmm.
basically. I mean, the maze was such a for its time, and I get it. Mazes in adventures are a slippery slope at
Yeah.
best about, when do they become frustrating? When is enough? This is definitely a huge maze.
Yeah.
And its purpose is to frustrate you. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly that's what its purpose is. And keep in mind, back in the just five or 6 years earlier, when the first adventures were being written and published, that was a big mapping and exploration was really what D&D was all about.
Yeah.
And having a big maze is that, some people would love it. I imagine some of the folks from the late 70s, early 80s loved the challenge of trying to map
Hmm.
that or just to negotiate it and try and get through it. Whereas possibly the modern gamer, after a half hour of that maze, they're
Yeah.
probably done, and
Yeah.
they might be ready to move on to something else, and the game master too. So definitely a
Hmm.
difference there. So
It's interesting to me how that's sort of evolved, how earlier D&D play involved, at least in my mind, a lot more players with graph paper trying to suss their way
yeah,
through. Where now, even my own DMing style, I tend to really just lay out the map for my players and not really force them to map. Where I feel like in the old days, it was here's your pencil, here's your graph paper. If you screw it up, it's on you. You've got to map the best you can and find your way through and that kind of thing. So it's yeah, I think you're right. I think the modern kind of 5e gamer wouldn't have the patience for a whole lot of maze. But it is a wonderfully devilish maze, that said.
Yeah, even though one of the pillars of 5e adventure design is exploration.
Yeah.
So, one third you're supposed to be doing. TSATs, I hope I'm saying that right, made a great comment that it makes sense that the Egyptian theme came out at that time because the King Tut artifacts were touring US museums, and that is so true. I remember having a full
Mm.
color book on cataloging all of the King Tut treasures and everything, and I remember flipping through that and just being more impressed at all the gold stuff, the gold mask and everything, and just being absolutely inspired by it. And then Shade of Icarus chimes in with Power Slave from Iron Maiden. I'm gonna assume that's a song, and I know I'm gonna get a lot of grief for that, but yeah, I'm assuming that's a song from Iron Maiden, not
I know
some
one of the
powerful
right.
slave that was stuck in an Iron Maiden device. I
I
don't
know
know.
one of the yeah. Well, one of the didn't one of the posters or covers or something for Iron Maiden had the mascot right in an Egyptian thing, whatever the mascot's name is. Somebody Eddie or
Let's
whatever he was called.
Yeah,
Eddie.
let's ask Shade of Icarus. I'm guessing they know.
Yeah. Uh I remember that much. But you're right. Yeah, it's funny. I totally forgot that. The whole King Tut thing, because I actually saw it when it came to New York one of those
Oh
times
wow.
back in the day, and it was something,
Awesome.
but it was really something that was a very popular exhibit and very much in the news, and it was like a big
Oh
deal
yeah.
when it, came over to America and kind of made the rounds. It was, I mean, I'd go see it today.
Yeah.
I love to see, one of the, I guess, fortunate things about being here in northern New Jersey is I'm just spitting distance from the New York museums. So I've many times in my youth, I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and would see they have a rather impressive gallery of Egyptian items there, as well as the Temple of Dembert that's just been brought over brick by brick. So
Wow.
yeah.
And that I missed all that. I would admit in the early 80s I was not going to museums. I thought those were the most boring things in the world. I've learned to love them now more. But I did kind of get to relive that probably in the early 2000s, I'm guessing, when Cleopatra's exhibit came
Hmm.
around and I went to the Franklin Institute to watch it and look at that. And I admit that was fascinating. And if there was a King Tut exhibit that came around, and I was more interested in it and of the age going to museums, I would have been all over that. Would have
Hmm.
absolutely been all over that. So without a doubt, I want to talk about a couple of things that I don't want to harp on them too long, but a couple of things I actually did not like about this
Okay.
adventure. You're probably going to be a little bit surprised by this, but how did you feel about the opening of the adventure, where basically the
Yeah.
PCs are framed kind of for something they didn't do it. At least it implies it into, but it was a pretty ham-fisted. I
Yeah.
mean, all right, it wasn't you're in a tavern and someone walks up to you and drops a pile of gold on your table and hires you. It wasn't that,
Yeah.
but it was a little bit. It was more like you're basically you're out into the desert and the guards read this scroll to you and basically say you must go
Yeah.
explore the desert and otherwise,
Right.
yeah, basically. And even and it said like if you go off the track or if you get too far off, like the guards are always there or something and they'll get you back going right direction. So it was a little bit how did you feel about that part of it? So
It is something. It's funny. I kind of think it more with humor these days, but that opening is something I absolutely think of when you asked what I think of when I think of this
okay.
module. That opening kind of death by hanging, death by fireball, death by lightning bolt. I kind of
Yes,
chuckle to
yes.
myself because obviously the railroady of railroady openings. And there's also, I think, even structurally, it's very easy for players to miss one or two key areas in the beginning of this
Yeah.
module. There's sort of a key area in the sunken city, and there's someplace else, and players could potentially miss those. I really think things are a little rough until it gets into the tomb. and again, I chalk that up, I think, a little bit to the kind of Hickman Revolution way of writing, because I think one of the criticisms of the Hickman's earlier work, at least, was that sometimes they would run a little bit roughshod over the rules or over the stats or over anything in the service of the plot. So, one does wonder if one of the more experienced designers that was on the scene at the time, if they had taken the reins and worked a little closer with the Hickmans on this structurally, kind of get things off to a better foot initially in the wilderness, one wonders what we would have had. So yeah, it's a little choppy in the beginning. I think once you get to the tomb, things are solid, but
Yeah,
certainly, and I love the fact that there is the wilderness component to this. It's almost a
yeah, yeah,
necessity. It makes it so much fuller, but I think it could be a little bit of a rocky road. Like you said, if you have players that don't like that sort of opening, whenever my group has played this, and I kind of DM'd this a few times, honestly, people didn't care. I just kind of threw the opening at them, and it was like, yeah, that's nice, let's get into it. And that was that. So when I read it personally, it wasn't a problem, but yeah, obviously it could certainly be a problem if people don't like their starts railroady. So
yeah. I know I've never used that start, and it was funny. I'd forgotten about it until I did the review, and
that's
I was
funny.
like, when I was reading it, I was like, "What is this?"
Oh
And I'm
yeah.
like, and I was like, I almost had to like do a double take and look at the adventure. Am I reading the right adventure here? I'm like, this is weird. I don't remember it starting this way, and I'm like, but oh yeah, it certainly does, and it
Yeah,
takes you,
that's
in my
funny.
opinion, takes you out of it a little bit in
Yeah,
the
because
beginning.
that's the first thing I think of.
Wow.
It's one of the things I think
Yeah.
of. I don't know why, just with this particular, not even the whole series, but just this particular module that I always, maybe because I have DM'd it that way, I always remember,
Yeah.
that kind of little bit ham-fisted opening.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you think of the components of the book as far as length, art,
Oh,
and all that?
amazing. I mean, 32 pages, decent amount of artwork. Most of them are small.
Mhm.
Love the cover art by
Oh yeah,
Holloway.
yeah,
I didn't even realize Holloway did
yeah,
covers. I was like,
yeah,
I was shocked to see that was his cover. I don't
yeah.
know, and I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest with you. I guess because I always envision his interior art and it always
Sure.
being a little bit on the comedic side.
Yep.
Comedic but not comedic kind of thing, like not slapstick comedic, but sometimes, pretty
No, but his illustrations, even a couple, and I think he played it more serious in this adventure
so
than
I
some.
totally, yeah.
But there are one or two, even in this book, there's one or two illustrations that, he's known that his
Yeah.
illustrations edge on the whimsical. Because I remember at one
Whimsical.
point,
That's probably the best way
yeah,
to say it.
because
Yeah.
you remember he was doing a lot of the illustrations for West End's Paranoia for a while.
Yep.
And I
Yeah.
remember thinking that was a match made in heaven,
Yeah.
because so
Totally.
fit his style
Yeah.
of illustration, because there is that sort of, and there are some bits of humor in the adventure, the way it's written too, frankly. So I think there are little kind of funny bits in there. So yeah, thankfully he didn't get too kind of silly with his art.
Yeah.
I love the cover. I
No, the
think,
cover's
again,
amazing.
when I
I
look at
mean,
it, yeah, I don't think
yeah.
immediately Holloway when I look at that cover, but
Agreed. Yeah.
it's one of the more impressive cover
Yeah.
pieces, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
completely 100% agree. I mean, that one is just right.
you know,
And yet this was the double. We had the two cardstock foldable,
yeah.
whatever you want to call them, and bits and everything. One which is the full color piece of art on it, but that's fine. But
Mhm.
another full color player handout, which was great. The maps, like you said, were just amazing. All the different maps and everything. I just yeah, the presentation of it was great. We had new monsters
Yep.
at the back, five new monsters. The adventure was presented in a format which was different. It was a little bit
Hmm.
more technical
Yeah.
than previous adventures were, which I think is a good evolution. I think definitely. It was a little bit less of the Wild Wild West and kind of do whatever you want. Obviously,
Mhm.
read aloud text. Almost too much read aloud text in parts. When you finally meet the Pharaoh ghost, he kind of rambles on for quite some time, but it's an important part of the adventure, which
Yeah.
I think is so I think that's okay in that regard because it's kind of a very seminal
Hmm.
part of what's going to happen and kind of laying out the whole backstory, the Pharaoh's backstory. One of the things, and the other major complaint I have about the
Hmm.
adventure is the final encounter actually with
Hmm.
in the Pharaoh's tomb, where basically there's just a plain old mummy there,
Yeah.
and it's like it just seemed like a missed opportunity. I
Hmm.
felt like the main villain really was the wizard,
Yeah.
that worked with the Pharaoh.
Yep.
You know, and he was like unkillable. He was like he didn't he wasn't like undead. He was kind of like he was like a magic jar kind of a situation. His heart
Hmm.
was removed and in a jar. But he seems to steal the show, and he's near the end of the
Yeah.
adventure. But it's like I almost feel like you get to that final encounter and then you open up that sarcophagus and it's literally just a mummy and not even like a mummy
Hmm.
spellcaster or something different.
Right.
Little bit let down by that, a little bit let down by that. But really that's the only two complaints I can kind of find.
Hmm.
Everything else about this adventure is amazing. You know,
Yeah.
from the format to the maps to the art to the backstory to the, like you said, the Hickman Revolution. You know, it's really I think it's an extremely important adventure kind of in the days. To be honest with you, I kind of thought it came out later than 82. I kind of thought it
Hmm.
came out in like 84.
Yeah.
You know, I guess I didn't realize it came out as early as it did,
Hmm.
and really started that.
It has the
um
feel of a later adventure.
it
It
does.
really does, like you said, because there is so much they're trying to give it structure by labeling
Yep.
things and doing that. And while we're
And,
talking about the art, I want to quickly call out before I forget that little footer art for the, I guess it's the robber press room where the walls
mhm.
squeeze together. And there's this wonderful little, sliver of art at the bottom of the page that where the characters are seen from above is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely agree with you as far as the final room. Maybe they thought they would switch the focus a little more on that wizard because we're sort of doing a deed for the Pharaoh, so they didn't want to make like
You
the
know, that
Pharaoh
could
fight
be.
us too
Yeah.
much at the end or
Yeah.
something. But let's face it, after you go through a whole trapped tomb, fill this whole big pyramid, you certainly expect a big, if it's going to be a mummy, you expect an awful special mummy at the end.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that was something on rereading now where I was surprised. I just assumed the mummy had some kind of tweaks or some little special
No.
things going on. And I kind of looked at it, I said, that's just the mummy.
He's just a
So
mummy. Yep.
absolutely, yeah, I agree. That's kind of a down point. I think one of my other, I guess, good points I would put toward it, which I didn't mention, is I like the way the ruins are used throughout, the way the players are given opportunities to translate little snippets of the book, little wall
Yes.
writings, little things that it's an easy way to keep feeding the players information and clues. And yet it never really comes off as ham-handed because when you're in a tomb like this, you expect there to be wall writings and things. So it's the theme, without feeling like just a gimme to the players. And obviously they have to make rolls and checks to see what they can translate or what they can understand, so they're not given it all anyway. It's really a matter of different groups getting different amounts of information potentially. So I thought that was a nice touch. That's again something that's inspired me when I've written like Egyptian
Yeah.
themed things. I've
Definitely.
definitely used kind of taunting, wall art that kind of evokes this and like the floor writing on the Tomb of Horrors, that kind of stuff, to talk to the players. I'm a big fan of that sort of
Yeah.
exposition.
No, totally. I am as well. So, shall we jump into our top five?
Yeah,
Are
let's
we
do it.
are we good to go? So, do you have any honorable mentions?
I do have an honorable mention, really super quick.
Okay.
Which would be area or areas, L53. These are the observation domes,
Mhm.
which again, just a little nod to humor. I love the note where it basically talks about how the temple, how the sort of priests of the pyramid would just come and relax in the domes and look down on the maze and just watch the poor, would be robbers
Yep.
dying.
The tomb robbers.
Basically,
Yeah.
yeah, that whoever built this was, thoughtful enough to put observation, ports in, so you could see the people suffering the traps below. So honorable mention to the observation domes.
Nice. I actually have, are you ready for this? Three
Uh-oh.
honorable
Oh,
mentions.
wow.
They're short. They're short. I'll make them short. I'll make them
Yeah, go
short.
for it.
The first one is Area G2, which is in the Sunken City.
Mhm.
which is really a little side thing, which really kind of kicks off the entire series if you're playing these all three together. A very important thing happens
Yeah.
during that little sub dungeon, if you will. But there is just something about falling through the
Hmm.
ceiling and landing on that sand pile and kind of
Yep.
going down that sand pile and then being attacked by giant spiders. And again, it was in the artwork, the full color plate of the art. Fascinating. I just always have remembered that
Mhm.
encounter. And there's a little bit of a backstory on why that was so important to me. That was we were gonna actually sit down and play all three of these adventures nonstop. We were gonna do this like 48-hour game session in a
Wow.
row. And I think I told this story once before, and we actually got together at a local church, and that's where we were going to play it because none of our parents would have let us do this at our house.
Mhm.
So we all like showed up at this church, and we were under the impression we got permission to do this, and we sat down and we started playing this adventure. And I remember I was so excited. I was going to play D&D for 2 days straight, and this was going to be great. And after about 5 or 6 hours, our parents showed up, and they're like, "No, you're not. You're coming home. It's like it's 10 o'clock at night. What are you nuts?" And I remember literally being like dragged away from the game table. But this was we were all set to play all three of these adventures, and I was a player, and I just remember that spider fight, and that
Mhm.
was so that was my first honorable mention. The second one, I gotta do a shout out to the Dust Digger. I love the Dust Digger.
Oh
I
yeah.
put the Dust Digger in
Yep.
Lost City. A starfish that lives under the sand, basically, but that can eat a camel. I mean, it's just that artwork
Yep.
was just all you needed to see. Love the Dust Digger design. And then the last one is in the encounter table, the doppelganger encounter table, which I actually give you a sub table to tell you what the doppelgangers are actually like disguised as. And it's like
Hmm.
there's like a dwarven party, an elven party, fighters and everything. I love that little touch. I think it was a really nice little cherry on top. It's like, hey, we're gonna put doppelgangers in the adventure. You
Yeah.
know, here's an interesting way to use them. And it just as a game master, really gave you something to think about. So that's my three honorable mentions. So
Nice. And the doppelgangers, when you encounter them in that one room,
mhm.
their kind of plot methodology is well written out because
Yes,
a lot of times it's difficult for a DM. Everybody always says, "Oh, the doppelgangers will pick off lone adventurers," but how often are adventurers actually lone?
exactly.
So, in that room, the doppelgangers have this whole plan of how they're going to separate characters away from the others, and it actually makes sense. So, it's kind of
Totally.
devious. So, yeah, props to the doppelgangers. So,
All right, why don't you jump in with your number five?
sure. Nice, easy number five, rather simple room, but area L19, the Well of Questions. This is the one with the Sphinx sort of sitting above the water channel. There's a whole situation where characters can get swept down the water. But of course, the meat of the encounter is the Sphinx answering, asking the riddle, which I love. I do think, we've talked about murder mysteries and how they should be run and how you should give more clues. And I do feel that a riddle like presented by a sphinx or a creature like that can definitely be a slippery slope. It's got to be handled properly by the DM because a lot of players will just flat out not know the answer. So it's got to be treated carefully. But that said, I've had a lot of fun playing this particular room over the years with players, using different riddles each time. So that's my number five is the Wello questions.
Nice. Excellent. My number five is this is gonna be a little bit strange, but we're gonna go here because
Okay.
I feel it's impactful. So it's the encounter format, the
Mhm.
specific format that is put forth in the beginning and described on how it's gonna go. Starts with the read aloud text. This was not the first adventure that had read aloud text, but I do remember that, very clearly. And it had a play section which kind of told you about the encounter, the monster, the character section, which was the NPC, the role playing notes, if you will, a treasure section, which has been carried directly over in modern gaming now, where you kind of list treasure as its own little thing, so you can kind of call it out. The trap slash trick section, which is well used in
Oh
this
yeah.
series of adventures. I'm not sure rolling this one out in a different adventure would have been a great idea because there generally weren't that many traps and or tricks or puzzles or whatever. And then that final one, another one too, where you have that lore section where it kind of
Yeah.
pulled out oh, and by the way, here's what the writing is on the walls, and here's how
Mhm.
just that presentation. I love it. It's definitely more borderline to technical writing. Maybe not as interesting to read as curl up with a book in front of a fireplace and read an adventure, but certainly much easier to run at the game table to facilitate actually running an event. With six people kind of shouting at you, vying for your attention. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so that is actually
Hmm.
my number five is the actual encounter format.
Nice. I didn't put that down as one of my five, but definitely impactful and yeah, certainly a departure from the usual chaos we've had in modules before this. Even my beloved Timochin, where you read it and everything's sort of intermixed with everything.
Yeah.
I really like the way it works here. I think the only place I found that clunky at times was for some reason, and then maybe it's just the way I read it, is the monster section, because sometimes it would say, the monster does this, and then literally one sentence later they would tell you what the monster is. And maybe I'm just spoiled by fifth edition at this point, where I'm used to seeing that monster name in bold and just telling me what it is right away. But
Yeah.
I had this sense of, why are you keeping me in suspense as the DM? Just tell me what the monster is. But beyond that, like you said, the tricks and traps and everything being laid out so functionally, almost on a, like you said, a technical writing level, makes it a lot easier to navigate this thing. So all right, so where are we? My number four
You're number four.
is area. I guess they all have L's in front of them. L52, the prayer temple, the priesthood. This is the area. It's got the pit trap that then can deposit you. You can technically go up that shaft, I guess, either way, but drops you down the pit shaft onto the hay down by the Minotaur. So, in case you want to keep the Minotaur company. But then it's also got a gem that is trapped with a sort of foghorn, where basically, if the gem is removed, then the sound starts issuing, and basically until you either put it back or just beat the heck out of the statue.
Yep.
I think it's great. Because again, I like that kind of trap as to mix things up. I remember back in G2, the one of the giant ones where they had the what was it, the Shadow skull or something is removed, or if you
Yes.
take a shield or something, then the Shadow skull would start screaming, alarm robbers. I like that kind of thing. It feels very old school and fun to me. So yeah, that's my number four, is the prayer temple area.
Cool. Cool. Okay. My number four is a little bit of a cheat. It's really like 21 encounter areas. So this is Corden's Master Maze. Yeah, I have a feeling you're going to talk about this a lot more in a bit. But love the maze. The maze is just, again, it's iconic. The mist is amazing. It obscures your vision. It confuses your sense of direction. Once you first get teleported into the maze, you don't know which way north is because each character is facing like a random direction. Love that. You lose your ability to count, so you can't like try
Mhm.
and say it's 10 feet wide or whatever like that and everything. I love the rounded corners.
Mhm.
Neat little touch there. Again, the map is just amazing. The fact that they show the maze, they show the mist on the maze sections and the sections that aren't misted, which is great. There's doppelgangers. We talked about the doppelgangers
Mhm.
and the fact that the doppelgangers kind of use their tactics, kind of, try and separate the PCs that way, which is great. There, of course, there's a Minotaur lair,
Of
which you
course.
have to have Minotaur lair. But what's crazier about the Minotaur lair is in the wandering encounter. The Minotaur lair has two Minotaurs. You're like, all right, there's two Minotaurs in the maze. That sounds good. Probably one more than you need. Okay, but one of the wandering encounters, you could run into 12 Minotaurs. Like, I don't know if that's like a misprint and it's supposed to be two, but
Yeah,
like 12 seems obscene. And it's like,
it
again,
does.
12 balance people. There's no way that fifth to seventh level characters are going to
No.
probably be able to defeat 12 Minotaurs in a maze with all of their abilities in the maze and everything. But anyway, yeah, it's just kind of crazy and all that. But love it. There's some nice treasure actually kind of randomly scattered around, just lying
Oh yeah.
around, but most of it is cursed. So
Yep.
I just again love everything about the maze. It's probably the one of the
Mhm.
most iconic encounter areas of this, and I get to use basically 21 sub areas for one encounter. So love it. So
Nice. All right, my number three is Area 66, the Treasury of the Pharaohs. This is essentially the area where you pass through the illusionary sort of painting and the
Mhm.
boat is floating out there with one of the, kind of MacGuffins that you've got to find. Just
I think
such a
I
great,
think we have a picture of that. I think if
yeah,
Elena could toss that
that's
picture
right.
up there.
If we can put a picture up of the Reed boat, that would be
Yeah.
awesome. Just such an insane, otherworldly area. Definitely gets the players thinking. It's definitely one of those moments where the players are going to huddle around the table and figure out, how the devil are we going to get this thing? And players can potentially take a fall of 10,000 feet.
Above and land on the pyramid.
Yeah,
It's like it's ten
which is
thousand feet
just
above the pyramid. You land
right,
on the pyramid and
which
take
is just
some ungodly
completely
amount of
insane.
damage.
Um, I don't I don't always like completely otherworldly or crazy things like this, but in the case of this module, there's one or two areas like that I like, and this is one of them. So yeah, it's just a crazy problem solving area, very memorable. I think something that when players go through this, if they get that, I mean, that'll be one of the things they'll remember is getting to that boat,
Yes.
finding themselves, way up there in the sky. So yeah, easy number three, the treasure of the pharaohs.
Nice. Okay. My number three, going a little bit off the reservation again here. This one is it's more in general. It's the maps in this adventure. Overall,
Mm-hmm.
the maps. Um, love the extra. First of all, we get more maps than we ever gotten probably before with all the extra fold out cardstock dividers. Love the wilderness map. And then the fact that you've got call outs to all the different areas. Like
Oh
here's
yeah.
the sunken city over
Yeah.
here, and here's the temple, and here's the pyramid, and here's the
Mm-hmm.
obelisks and everything. I love that part of it. And then you get into the so you got that classic wilderness crawl part. Then you get into the individual, dungeon levels, if you will, and everything. Then there's the cross section of the pyramid, which
Yeah.
is amazing to kind of figure out. I
Yeah.
mean, at that point, there wasn't all these documentaries on TVs where they've mapped out with lidar what exactly the interior of a pyramid looks like. I found that fascinating. I never knew what the inside of a pyramid looked like until I
Yeah.
saw this cross-section map, probably for the first time back in the early 80s. So I found that fascinating. And there was the cross sections of some of those encounters, like you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
the L19, and the haystack encounter. There
Yep.
was these neat little cross-section maps that just kind of show you what was going on because there was like two or three different levels and it was
Yeah.
impacting. And I've definitely taken that to heart. To whenever I feel a cross-section map will
Mm-hmm.
give you a better feel for like how an encounter works. It's
Yeah.
definitely a great tool. So I love that. And if we've got some pictures of the maps, if Elena's not already showing them, you can pop those up too. But just in general, the maps and
Mhm.
interesting, they were not the isometric maps, which were not that far down the road.
Yeah.
But they were still amazing quality, and
Oh yeah.
the cleanness of the maps, they were just not random caves. They
No.
were, it was just all built with a purpose and just iconic and just memorable. So
Yeah.
that's my number three. Yeah, number three.
Again, something I did not name as a sort of I actually didn't name any facets in this particular endeavor,
Yeah.
but easily could have done that. Like I said, the maps is one of the first things I think of. It's one of my favorite things, and I'm a sucker for what I like to call breakout maps, and that's what these are. They sort of
Yeah.
they give you the big hexes, and they break each hex out into whatever it is, six or eight or something little hexes, and then
Yep.
you have the little hexes, carrying over to a map of the sunken city or whatever. It's sort of almost like an arrow showing you exactly, giving you the sunken city map, but then showing you exactly where it is in the wilderness. It's just, and it's all understandable. It's all very clean, functional mapping. And then any place where it does get tricky, because there are places here engineering wise where it does, they
Hmm.
give you the cross sections, which are for me, I think super helpful. So I absolutely running this referred to those cross sections a lot. So yeah, totally agree. All right. So my number two, I have a feeling this might pop on one of yours. We'll see. Was the Dome of Flight. This was, I think, one of the more infamous areas. This is the sort of dome area with the palm trees, with the falling, exploding, palm fruit or pineapples or whatever they were. And then all the command words for the different levels of reverse gravity, where potentially characters could, float up to the ceiling and be stuck up there until somebody decided to, trigger something to release them, in which case it potentially could fall down. But there's different ways the characters could move up and down sort of levels within this room. Plus again, you've got that almost otherworldly trap going on. I think there's a cross section of this. I think cross section graphic 2 kind of shows a side view of this area. Just a very interesting, creative area. When I think of the things like this, I do think of some of those earlier classic special modules like S3 that would just have these, or the Tower of the Inverness kind of feel. That's the feel I get of this, kind of reverse gravity room. Is just something very otherworldly. But in the shape of this particular pyramid, it fits because we've got all these levels, and now you have this sort of, this shaft, and then the characters can move up and down it. So it makes structural sense. So that's my number 2, is the Dome of Flight.
Awesome. Excellent. So my number 2 is Area L33, the Doma flight. There it is.
Ding,
And that's a
ding. Here's
direct
our
matchup.
crossover.
That's a direct
Yeah,
crossover.
2 for 2.
Yes, yes,
So to
2 for 2.
speak.
Yeah, again, for everything that you just mentioned, yeah, I mean, the only thing I think I would like to add, the only thing that you missed, in addition to the waterfall that hides one of the exits, which is kind of cool,
Mhm.
is the fact that the reason this room was originally constructed was so that they could get the heavy sarcophagus up to the upper
Mm,
level. And that little note was
right.
put in there. And again, a simple sentence, maybe two
Hmm.
sentences, to just kind of say this is why this wonky room exists. Like,
Yeah.
now we didn't explain why there's a palm tree with grenade fruit growing in it. They
Why
kind of
not,
glossed
right?
over that part of it, but it was just really kind of cool to think that the Hickmans thought, oh wait, how are we going to get that huge heavy sarcophagus up to the upper
Hmm.
level? And that's been one of those things on Egyptian architecture, on like how did they do some of these things? How did they get the granite, cover stone, all the way up,
Hmm.
10 stories or whatever and everything. And how did they get that? And where did they mine it from? And all that kind of stuff. So I thought that was fascinating. And
Hmm.
again, I love it. I love the rules, all the little rules for the grenade palms,
Yeah.
the palm tree grenades, the fruit that you can try and catch them. If you
Hmm.
walk near it, there's a chance one will fall off. You can carry them with you, but every time you fall down, they might explode.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy, but like in a good way. So that's definitely my number 2 area, the L33, the Dome of Flight.
Nice. And you're right. The sort of stat wise, the fruit is very well explained,
Yes, very
I,
much
I
so.
frankly wish other stuff in this module was as well explained. That there were places where, like I said, that maybe it's a Hickman thing, but some of the stats were a little like the dervishes. Some of them were, HD 3 or 4 or something, but they had like 2 or 3 hit points, and they were and
Yeah.
some point we run into Chibang. What are they, Chibang Man? And I'm like, what's a Chibang Man?
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think
I don't.
Bang Man
I'm
got
not going
left
to
on the
claim
edge
to
of the floor.
understand. Yeah, there's a lot of things that kind of just go on by, but they definitely put their attention here, to the details. So very nice. All right, so my number one.
Number
Da-da-da.
one.
This is maybe a little bit of a cheat, and I
Okay.
didn't say the whole maze. I kind of blew over the maze, even though it's my favorite part of this thing. Is somewhat maze-like is the Grand Hall of the Pharaohs, Area 56. This is again obviously a very kind of multi-room area. I like the visuals of it with the water and the stairs and the way it's presented. It's very cool. There is kind of multiple layers of illusionary walls and things. There's the wonderful trap mirror, which I love. The
Yes.
fact that you have these kind of, I don't know what you would call them. It's not really it's not that mirror that appears in the GMG, but there's sort of like these clay,
Yeah. It's not a
figures.
mirror of opposition, but it's
Right,
very
that's what I
similar.
meant. I was
Yeah,
fumbling
very
for that.
similar.
Yeah, it's not a mirror opposition, but it's barking right up that tree. And I love mirrors opposition anyway. They're rarely used, but when they do, they're so much fun. So, and then you have the pet fist, which is just, again, a
Named the
kind of
Pet
little,
Fist.
yeah, which is sort of a little, I always pictured it, I think, a whole lot bigger than it was supposed to be, almost like Blue Meanie level big, but it's big on the map. So just having that fist at the end is the final, cherry on the sundae for me. So just such a cool area from one end to the other. So yeah, that's easy number one, Grand Hall of the Pharaohs.
Awesome. All right. And my number 1, follow it all up, is Area 66, the Reed boat, which is the treasury of the Pharaoh. Again, love that encounter. Probably the one encounter that I do think of when I think of this adventure,
Hmm.
outside of the maze. Just love that. the fact that, you've got the real maze, the real reed ship on one side of the room, and then you've got the painting of the sky on the other side, and you got to figure out to stick your head through there to
Yeah.
actually see that's the real reed ship that's got the gem on it. And you need the gem. The gem of Mo Pilar is one of the two ruling items that you're trying to get. And the clue that the fact that that there's the little pedestal for the gem on the other reed boat, but it's empty.
Hmm.
So I think this room is fun. It's that wonderful puzzle of it's only 30 feet, but clearly it's 10,000 foot drop. So
Yeah.
it's like however you can do it. And at first you're gonna be thinking, because I remember even says in the adventure, spells work. Like you can
Mhm.
cast fly or levitate or whatever, and it'll work fine. But I have to admit, their first thought now, all the players I've ever played, they're always like, we are not casting a fly spell and just going across because
Oh
something's
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
happen, like it's gonna be dispelled, or it
Yeah.
can't be that easy kind of thing.
Extreme caution has always been implied here.
Exactly. And then, an hour and a half later, they're still trying to figure out how
Yeah.
they're gonna,
Yeah.
securely, swing the
Yeah.
halfling over to the edge of the boat or whatever. So, but yeah, this encounter just I love it. I love the fact that it even says it's 10,000 feet above the pyramid. And
Yeah.
if you fall, it gives you the damage, 20 to 120 points of damage, and you fall on the top of the pyramid, which is just like insult to injury. So but yeah, so that's my definitely my favorite encounter in the entire thing. I thought about the hall that you did, the area
Uh-huh.
56. I gave that some strong consideration, but
Mhm.
again, I felt like it actually detracted from the adventure a little bit. I think really the wizard, he is mentioned like once, and I guess he's mentioned a couple of other times. I guess it's implied he's the one that created a lot of the magical effects in this adventure. But I guess I always thought in my head canon that the Pharaoh was the big,
Sure.
powerful spellcaster, and like he
Sure.
was the one that maybe cast all those things and everything. So it was a little bit odd, I think, and it
Yeah.
takes me out of it. It takes me out of the moment a little bit.
Hmm.
But still, that's an excellent encounter too. And yeah, we were talking when we were in the green room before we came on and everything. We could have easily done a top 10 for this module, between facets and
Oh
encounters,
yeah.
and there's just so much to love in here.
Hmm.
Obviously, I had three honorable mentions, and like I said, there were several encounters I didn't even mention. If we did go to 10, though, I think we probably would have overlapped almost all of them.
Oh
So,
yeah. But
so
definitely would have got more facets in there because this is a
yeah.
nice healthy size module. What is it, 34 pages
It's
or
32 pages, yeah.
32?
Plus the
And yeah,
extra booklet. So
yeah, plus that
yeah.
gate file. And the
Yeah.
insanity is that the original, I think, that the Hickmans published in 1980 was
Was
68 pages, which
Yeah, it was
holy.
even larger.
So
So
who knows? I mean, I don't know how it was formatted, but that who knows what was, the content of that. So
yeah. So no, definitely. So no, this is definitely a classic. If you are not familiar with the adventure, this is
yeah,
definitely one to run out and pick
it's
up. Pick up
amazing
all
it took
three,
us so
actually.
long to get to this one, but I think
Well, we were
right,
kind of
we
holding
knew we
off
were going to
on it.
get to this one
Yeah.
eventually. We
So
knew
this
this
was
was on our hit list. So
Yeah, this series a favorite of mine, so it was nice to kind of save this for a special time kind of thing,
definitely,
and
definitely.
be able to handle all three of them together.
Yep.
Because surprise, guess what we're going to talk about the next two shows.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so we're just about at the top of the hour. So again, it's amazing how quick time flies when we're
Mhm.
having a good time. Hagar the Horrible popped into the chat. I don't think I've ever seen Hagar the Horrible in here before, so welcome, welcome. And Ken
Welcome.
Jacobs commenting about the old Mirror of Opposition, which is, yeah, we can almost do a whole show on the Mirror of
Right?
Opposition, to be honest with you. So
101 ways to use a mirror of opposition.
yeah. Hey, I always wanted to do like a mirror dungeon. I always felt that that would be just
Mm,
fascinating. And obviously there'd be a mirror of opposition in there, but like
yeah.
the whole dungeon mirrors, and just, again, the players
Mhm.
would probably be done with it after about a half hour, but the game
Yeah.
master would probably have a lot of fun.
Well,
So
you know how I feel about mirrors,
you
in
do.
conjunction with the room of the mirrors and these kind of I love mirror effects and things like that. So
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of
So
fun.
I hear it. So
Very
all
old.
right, Rick, tell the folks what you got to tell them.
Sure. Well, as Chris mentioned, our next show is on Oasis of the White Plum, Module I4. We're going to just run
Yes.
right through this whole Desert of Desolation series. We'll be coming back at you on September 17th at 8 p.m. As always, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're delighted you could just, join two guys talking about the classic oldies here. If you liked what you saw, please give us a like, give us a follow. If you're watching later on YouTube and you haven't before, subscribe. And as always, keep the comments coming and keep your
Yeah.
comments during our show as now coming. We love that participation.
Yeah, yeah. History professor, we noticed you came in there a little bit late, but you were chiming in. And yes, they definitely do reflect the DM. Of course, you have to get a reflect pun in there. It wouldn't be a mirror show without it. So
No.
so we'll jump into our pearls of wisdom. So
Okay.
I guess my pearl of wisdom would be it's pretty simple actually. Don't forget about the traps. Traps
Mm.
are sometimes overlooked, and hey, this ties in perfectly with check out our landing page for Grimtooth's old school traps. Yes, I think some of the obviously the classic adventures traps were a pretty big thing, and traps and
Mhm.
monsters were a pretty big thing. I think they're used less and less these days,
Mhm.
especially some of the more complicated ones. I mean, yeah, you still get your poison needle ones, or you get your whatever, your scythe blade or whatnot. But I think really, and I think we're going to see this more as we move along in this series too. Some of these traps the traps are encounters themselves, basically,
Mhm.
where there's multi things going on. And really, you almost have to treat the trap as an encounter. So
Mhm.
so my pearl of wisdom would be like, hey, don't ignore traps. Give traps some
Yep.
love, and if you need some help with that, we're here for you because we're gonna have like
All the
150
traps you
traps
could want.
coming at you.
Yeah.
So love that. So that's my pearl of wisdom.
Nice. Yeah, you can't underestimate those traps. And I think done properly, tricks or traps can be very memorable parts of an adventuring experience, something the players remember a lot more than some of the more run-of-the-mill monster encounters, to be sure. So yeah, definitely worth remembering. So my pearl of wisdom, sort of riffing on what we've said about the maps and maybe some of the encounter areas here, is to steal a phrase, modularity. Is just when you're writing your own adventures as a DM, to think about building in a little bit of modularity. As I've DM'd many times over the years now, more and more, I'm learning, the cardinal sin is overwrite, not to overwrite, and just sort of predict what your players might do and where they might go. And one of the wonderful things of this adventure is there are areas like the Sunken City and some areas that can be used in a modular fashion, or even, the pyramid could be broken out, or you could take this module and break it out of the three. And I think that's in a way to write your own adventures instead of overwriting to death. Present one clear adventure area, but then write up some notes, but just notes on side tracks and potential campaign expansions. And then if you put your players into it and they enjoy what's going on, they enjoy the locale or the desert or wherever you've thrown them, then you can expand outward, or you can put a little side tracks in between, adventures if they need a little more experience or magic items or whatever. But the idea is to kind of keep a little bit of that plug and play functionality that you see so well done in this module. I think it's a good idea when you're writing your own things at home, so you don't overwrite. So you keep it clean, but with room for expansion.
Oh, that's excellent advice. Hey, there's a great maze you can just grab and just drop that in
Mhm.
to one of your adventures. The next time you need a maze, just boom, there you go.
Yeah.
They'll never know where you got it from. Never at all. All right. So we do actually have a couple questions. Are there going to be any new traps in Grimstooth? So Great
Mhm.
Bakes, Great Ape Tex. I will just simply leave it at this. We are giving this book the official OAR treatment. So if you're familiar with any of our other OAR books, you'll know that we do love to put new content in them, and we have a lot of fun with that. Yeah, there could potentially be some new traps in there. And then History Professor says, how often do you guys play? Once a week, once a month? I'll answer that one real quickly. I
Just
play about every other week,
okay.
in a regular game. That doesn't count board gaming and other gaming on the side. That's just role playing. So how often do you play, Rick?
I DM for a regular group once a month. Um,
Nice.
because it is like wrangling cats. We're at that point
It
where
is.
everyone's got spouses and kids, and the kids are
Mhm.
getting older and busier. And have to go off to soccer practice and this and that and the other thing. So it can be difficult getting us all in one place. We certainly don't game as much as we would like to, but
Yes.
we're steadily holding to once a month, and then we struggle maybe when it gets to like December and the holiday period a little bit. But yeah, that's our bulwark, is we've held out. We don't want it to get worse than, to become more seldom than once a month. So yeah, I'm gaming once a month as far as D&D is concerned.
Cool. Excellent. So, all right, with that, we are at the top of the hour. Everybody have a great evening, and we will be back here in 3 weeks, and we will be ready to talk about Oasis of the White Palm.
Yeah.
So, have a great night, everybody.
Good
Bye.
night, folks.